In August 2021, I started a special restoration project that, due to work, life, and a little procrastination, took a lot longer to complete than expected. It all started when I stumbled across a Mantua 284 Berkshire steam locomotive kit on eBay. This partially completed kit was water damaged. Basically, all of the metal components were corroded, some worse than others, but a lot of the parts were still there. Considering that Mantua Berkshires are uncommon, and finding the unpainted kit version is even harder, I decided this locomotive was perfect to be repainted for the Ephrata Valley Railroad. But the first step was restoration. I began by removing corrosion on the tender trucks and locomotive trailing truck, using my Dremel with wire wheel attachment. The tender trucks came apart easily, which would later enable me to spray paint them gloss black, although I knew I'd have to remove the paint on the parts of the tender trucks that needed to be clean for electrical pickup. I then moved on to removing corrosion from the rest of the parts: the cylinders, bottom plate, frame, and brass contact pieces. I also started removing some of the corrosion from the drivers, before I turned my attention to the motor. Upon testing the open frame motor and verifying that it still worked, I removed all surface rust with the Dremel and took off one brush plate to access and clean the commutator. A drop or two of oil around the motor bearings, and the old Mantua motor ran as good as new. Next, I stripped the die-cast boiler, cab, and tender shell in .3 brake fluid. The plastic cab and tender shell only required 24 hours of soaking, while the boiler soaked for 48 hours in brake fluid. Unfortunately, the paper box residue stuck onto the plastic cab and tender shell from what I assume was due to sitting in the wet kit box for some time, did not budge, so I went to work using Goo Gone. This was successful, but only for the tender shell. Not all of the paper residue came off the cab, but luckily I had a spare one which I would later use. Some time went by before I got back to the Mantua Berkshire restoration. I returned to getting the rest of the corrosion off of the driver wheels. Unfortunately, the corrosion removal also took off some of the black paint on the drivers, so I disassembled what was left of the rod assembly to prepare the drivers for spray paint, which I knew would be tedious. In fact, the next step I took was spray painting all the Berkshire parts on a nice sunny day in November. At that point, the project once again lost steam.